Back to our study of the book of Revelation. And thank you for all. I haven't scared you off yet. I've been trying really hard. But y'all just keep coming back for more, you know. But I like it. I can't do it. I can't scare anybody.
That's right.
What I want to do at this point is I want to go back and I want to look at the entire what we've learned so far quickly. It's not going to be detailed or anything, but I just think sometimes you need to pull back and look at the view from 30,000 feet up and just look at the whole broad picture. And the reason that the timing of this is that starting with this study, we're going to be moving into the things that come after these things, the future, the prophecy part of it. And that's where a lot of weirdness happens, a lot of weird creatures and animals and horns and multiple heads. But before we do that, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here. So I want to start at chapter 1, and I want to say, here's where we are now. And so everything in between. So let's take a few minutes and do that. I just think it's important that sometimes we get refocused, and this will refocus us. So again, you've seen this multiple times. This was, Jesus sat down when he got to the island of Patmos and started talking to John. He says, look, we're going to break this thing into 3 parts. We're going to talk about the things you've seen up to this point. We're going to talk about the things that are, and then the things after these things, which is a little confusing, but it's just the next part after the part that is are. And that was in Revelation 1:19. And so I'm not going to go into detail on that because you've seen it so many times. But here back in chapter 1, just as a quick review, we saw that the Apostle John was exiled to the island of Patmos. He saw a vision while there of the resurrected Jesus, and he received his commission to write what he sees. And what was kind of important here is he doesn't receive a narrative. Most of Revelation, he's shown sort of like a movie picture. He's shown things, and he's supposed to write those things down. He doesn't necessarily even recognize what they are, but he does his best to describe what they are. And our interpretation of what John saw is given to us by the Holy Spirit and by studying the Bible. And we have to go back and study the whole Bible, really, to understand what's happening in Revelation. And Daniel, that we've been in, is kind of a sister book to Revelation. So you look at Daniel, it's a prologue, and then you go into Revelation. And that's where we've been. But the important thing is our interpretation really comes from the Holy Spirit. Unbelievers will read this and it'll all just be fantasy to them. They won't understand it. And you have to have the Holy Spirit to really get it. So the other thing that we saw in chapter 1 that was really important is that we saw it was a very detailed chain of custody that you don't see in the other letters. And what that does is it assures us that the contents of Revelation are true and factual and they're from God, and so they can be trusted. And then lastly, we saw that God promised a blessing for all who read it or hear it read to them, which even if you don't get any of it, you're going to get a blessing just because you sat here with me throughout. That's why you all keep coming back. You wait for that blessing. Now I get it. So next after that was the things that were, and that happened pretty quickly because there's only one chapter. Then we went into the things that are. And what we discovered is the things that are, part 2, is the church age. And that's covered in chapters 2 through 3, and it's done through letters written by Jesus to 7 churches that were actually in existence in John's day. And we learned that these letters included a prophetic side, not to give those churches a side of what was going to happen, but to give us, as a look back, now that we can see back over the church history for 2,000 years, we can see that, hey, each of these letters actually lined up with phases or periods of time that the church went through. And so the church age is considered the things that are. And we knew that because we read the first verse of chapter 4 of Revelation, where it talks about, now we're going to talk about the things that happen after these things. So it's pretty apparent. But as we studied the 7 letters of 7 churches, we learned that we're currently living, if you look at most Christian churches, we're living in the Laodicean period, the 7th church. And that's the apostasy church. That's the lukewarm Christian church. There's still some Philadelphia-like churches around, and Michael Memorial is one of them, and where they're teaching biblical truth. They have pastors that are telling us the truth, whether we want to hear it or not, and they have mission mindedness, and they're making disciples, and they're baptizing people almost every week. So those are the Philadelphia type churches, but there's very few of them around. Believe me, I've looked, and it's hard to find them. Most churches are the Laodicean church. It's a church. It's a time where pastors are failing to teach the truth of the Bible because they're afraid of hurting people's feelings. It's a time when pastors are getting up there and saying that homosexuality is not so bad. And it's okay to abort your baby. And I mean, these pastors are doing this because they're what the Bible calls tickling the ears. They're basically trying to fill those pews. And guess what they're filling those pews with? They're filling them with lukewarm Christians. And a lukewarm Christian is someone who goes to church on Sunday and then lives the way they've always lived for the rest of the week, really with no change. And the Bible doesn't say that that's what born again means. Born again means that you're a new creation and that the old is dead. And so I know that there's still a lot of true born again saved Christians. I know you all pretty well, and I believe everybody in this room is one. But there's an awful lot of professing Christians who are not really saved, but they think they are. And I'm sorry to say they're going to be learning very soon that they're not, and it's going to be a sad day. So it's up to us to talk to people. So the things that are describe the period in history where Jesus' church still exists. In 2024, the church still exists, so we're still in the period of the things that are. We haven't moved into the things after these things yet. This church age bridges the period of the first century when the church first started, and John received this revelation, until the events that take place after these things. So the church is kind of a bridge in that time period. As long as the church is still around, the third part of Revelation cannot happen. And so those times have yet to begin, and that's where we're going next in our study. That's why I wanted to do this overview, is because we're going to be getting into part 3 here. Even starting today, we're going to be talking a little bit about it. But before we move forward into part 3 of Revelation, we had to take a journey back in time. That's where we started a couple weeks ago. We went back to Daniel. We wanted to understand how God brings our age to an end. We wanted to understand why this age began and what it's called and how it began. So as we learned, the background of our present age is found in Daniel chapter 2 and chapter 7, by the way, as you'll learn today. We've been studying chapter 2 for a couple of weeks, and tonight we're going to do Daniel chapter 7, which parallels chapter 2. And still talking about the age of the Gentiles, but it's told in a different way. So we learned about ages and last days, those two terms that are used in the Bible, and it's important that we know what those are. We learned that an age, which is eon in the Greek, A-I-O-N, eon is the way I'm pronouncing it, but maybe it's A-I-O-N, but it's a long but finite period in God's program of history. And ages follow one after another, and the division between ages serve as important milestones in God's program. So ages have a definite beginning and they have a definite end. And the period leading up to the end of an age is called, quote, the last days. So we wanted to know, well, what age are we in? What age is this? When did it begin? And of course, the big important question is, when will it end? And we learned in Luke 21, verse 24, that Jesus named this age, and he called this current age the age or the times of the Gentiles. As we know, this age of the Gentiles had a definite start. We studied last week that it started about 600 BC, before Christ was here, when King Nebuchadnezzar totally defeated Jerusalem and took the inhabitants and started scattering them. We learned the age of the Gentiles began then, and so that was way before the church came into existence, obviously. The church resides within this age, and it's part of the last days, bridging that gap. So how will we know when the age of the Gentiles ends? To know this answer to this question, we need to know first what constitutes, what's the definition of the age of the Gentiles? Well, Jesus gave us that again in Luke 21:24, and he said that 3 things have to happen, or are going to happen during the age of the Gentiles, or they are happening. First of all, Israel would be subjected to Gentile powers. They'll be persecuted, enslaved, and killed during this age of the Gentiles. You look back on the history of Israel, you'll see that that's all been going on and still is today. And secondly, Jesus said that the Jewish people would be scattered outside their homeland, that they would be scattered and exiled in other nations. And then thirdly and finally, the capital city of Jerusalem would be conquered and occupied, at least to varying degrees, by Gentiles. And that's even happening today, as I said last week. So, as we learned that as long as these three things remain true, the age of the Gentiles continues. So when will the age of the Gentiles stop? Well, it stops when these three things get reversed. It just makes sense. The persecution of the Jews stops. The Jews will be gathered up from the four corners of the earth and brought back to their homeland. And they will once again control all of Jerusalem and reestablish their temple. So all of that will be restored to them. So for us to understand when the age of the Gentiles began and when it will end, again, we look to chapter 2, and we saw Daniel interpreting a dream for King Nebuchadnezzar. And as we studied in Daniel 2, we learned that this chapter was an overview of the age told by a statue in his dream. It represented a timeline of the four kingdoms that would dominate this age of the Gentiles. So we saw that the first was Babylon, ran by King Nebuchadnezzar when he first attacked Israel. The second was the Medo-Persian Empire, who continued the domination over the Gentiles and the control of Jerusalem. And the third was the Greek Empire. The fourth and final kingdom began when Rome conquered the Greek Empire, but it didn't remain like that. Instead, it fragmented into hundreds of countries, coming together in alliances and then breaking apart, and wars and struggles, and that's my land, no, that's your land, it's whose land, and over again, even until today. There are currently 195 countries in the world, and the political geography is in a state of constant flux. So we are definitely in that last period down there. The last image of the dream is a rock fallen from heaven, uncut by human hands, that destroys the entire statue. And that rock from heaven falls at the feet of the statue, representing the end of the timeline and the end of the age of the Gentiles, which is the Gentile domination over Israel. It establishes a new kingdom that fills the entire earth. And we learned last week that this rock pictures Jesus' second coming to the earth, and to finish the age of the Gentiles and establish this new kingdom, which will be dominated by Israel. The main thing to realize in Daniel 2 that is, as long as we're waiting for Christ, we remain in the Gentile age, and therefore there'll be Gentile domination over Israel. I said this last time I taught, but if you just want to know what's going on with the end times, is just keep your eye on Israel, keep your eye on Jerusalem. And what fixes the problem of Gentile domination over Israel is it's not fixed by a political peace in the Middle East. For years they've been trying to create political peace in the Middle East. That's not going to happen at man's hand. The only way that's going to happen is when Jesus returns, then it's going to get fixed once and for all. And in the kingdom age, Israel will be the chief nation on the earth, and all Jews will live in the promised land. And Jerusalem will be holy and protected from Gentile defilement. So today, as we study Daniel 7, we move a little step closer to understanding why what we just studied is important to understanding what happens next in Revelation. You may say, I thought I was here for Revelation. Why am I in Daniel? Well, what we're learning is very important for us to understand what's happening in Revelation. If we do it without this, we won't get it. So we know that the fourth kingdom is the only one that really matters. Why? Because that's where Jesus has come in, and that's the one we're in now. So that's the one we're most interested in. The other ones are kind of history, and it's good to know, but really this fourth kingdom is the one that we need to really study. And it turns out the purpose of Daniel 7 is to give us details about that fourth kingdom. And it gets pretty exciting because that's where we start moving into the future, start moving into the prophecies. So it paints for us a picture of how this Gentile kingdom will finally end. And we'll actually learn that today. We're going to know the end of the book today. There's going to be a spoiler alert. And we're going to learn how it ends. I know y'all don't know how it ends, but we're going to learn today. But so let's go ahead with that. That's our overview, 30,000 feet overview of the whole thing we've learned so far. And we're all up to date. So let's go ahead and start with Daniel chapter 7, and we're going to start with verse 2, because all verse 1 says is he's having a dream. So let's go to verse 2, and we'll go here. So Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And it was told, arise, devour much flesh. And after this, I looked, and behold, another, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So in chapter 2, we saw King Nebuchadnezzar having a dream, and Daniel interpreting it. What's different in chapter 7 is Daniel's the one now having the dream. And he actually, later on, we'll see, he calls on an angel to come and interpret it for him, because parts of it he doesn't understand. But like Daniel 2, this vision is a depiction of the age of the Gentiles, and the details as we learn them will confirm that. But this time, instead of a statue showing a timeline of the age, we're going to see animals which represent the nature of each period of time. And the animals line up neatly with the statue we saw in chapter 7. So first, we saw a lion, which, like the head of gold in our statue, it represents the nation of Babylon. And if you study history, guess what the national symbol of ancient Babylon was? That's right, it's a lion with wings. In fact, in the ruins of ancient Babylon, archaeologists have unearthed a lion statue with wings missing, but you can clearly see where the wings were on the statue. In Daniel's dream, the lion stands like a man and has a mind of a man, which symbolizes the man which had the start of the age of the Gentiles, King Nebuchadnezzar, of course. We'll return to this detail later, but for now, let's look at the next animal in Daniel's dream and see how it compares to the statue. The second animal is a bear with 3 ribs in its mouth, which represent the Medo-Persian part of the age of the Gentiles. This kingdom was a result of uniting Medes and Persians, but the Persians were by far the most dominant force of the Union. That's why you see the bear leaning to one side, because one of the two was more dominant. The kingdom reaches zenith by conquering Lydia, Babylonia, and Egypt. So that's represented by the 3 ribs devoured by the bear. So now the third beast represents the third kingdom, the Greek Empire, led by Alexander the Great. The Greek Empire moved swiftly and powerfully like a leopard, completing its expansion in only just 4 years. It took over everything in 4 years. And so therefore, a leopard with wings represents the absurd speed of the Greek conquest. The 4 heads, if you remember, we had 4 generals that took over after Alexander the Great died. Well, the 4 heads represent that, and those 4 generals divided into east and west, with 2 of them going together against the other 2. But so all of that's good, and it's all history, but really the important one is the 4th kingdom. That's the one that is we're most interested in, and it's also the one that Daniel gives the most attention to. It's the final kingdom that happens before Christ's return, and it's also the one we currently live in, by the way. So let's read on in Daniel 7, starting with verse 7, to see his description of the 4th kingdom. So he says this, After this I saw the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifyingly and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. That's an interesting vision. So, like in Daniel 2, the 4th kingdom breaks the pattern. It's a little different than the other 3 kingdoms. Remember in Daniel 2, the fourth kingdom began with Rome, but it becomes an alliance of Gentile powers. So it breaks into all these different countries. Collectively, these bits and pieces of what was once a single kingdom conspire to achieve the purposes of this age. So what's the purposes of the Gentile age? Well, to subjugate Israel, scattering the people outside the land, and maintaining control over Jerusalem. So that continues. But while in the case of the first three animals, Daniel referred to real animals, even though they were a little weird. This case, he's at a loss for comparison. It's hard for him to even describe it because this animal was so indescribable. And it looked like no other animal Daniel had ever seen. Here's one artist's rendition of this animal. Daniel said the animal was dreadful and terrifying. It's the stuff of nightmares. And like the statue in Daniel 2, this fourth beast crushes and breaks apart the previous three kingdoms. And now we kind of get some additional information about this kingdom beginning with the 10 horns on this beast. If you remember on Daniel 2, one of the last things we studied is that it had 10 toes. And now this beast has 10 horns, and that's really important. And we'll see a lot more on these horns later on. In fact, as we get into Revelation, into the next chapters of Revelation, we're going to see these horns talked about again. But both the toes and the horns represent one thing. They represent 10 kingdoms at the end of the Gentile age. But now we have some additional information. Now we learn that in addition to the 10, we find that there's an 11th who emerges out of the 10. And notice that this 11th is personified. And by that I mean it has eyes of a man and a mouth that speaks great things. This reminds us of Daniel's description of the lion standing like a man with a mind of a man. So if you remember, Nebuchadnezzar was the only man that had enough power granted to him to rule the entire earth. Well, likewise, we're going to see that pattern emerging here, where this one that comes at the end will end up ruling the entire earth. This 11th horn appears. He's going to uproot 3 of the original 10, and then he's going to take his place as the leader of the group and have power over the entire earth. And before we look deeper at this extra horn, let's finish the vision that Daniel has in chapter 7. He says, as I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. And the court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. So here we see the end of the age happens with the Ancient of Days, who is who? God. It's God seated on his throne in ruling and judgment. We remember that the statue ended the same way with the rock of Christ who comes down to heaven, from heaven to set up the kingdom. So we're seeing still the parallels between the statue and these beasts in Daniel's dreams. For the next several verses of Daniel 7, we'll see the beast defeated and Jesus setting up his kingdom. That's going to be real later on in Revelation, so I'm not going to cover that now. But Daniel finds his attention drawn to that fourth beast. He's really curious about it. And so that's where the rest of this chapter goes. So the passage in Daniel says that Daniel inquires about its meaning and he receives an answer. What does this beast mean, and what do these horns mean? So we're going to jump ahead to verse 20. We'll come back to the middle part of Daniel later, Daniel 7. But we're going to jump ahead to verse 20 where Daniel's told the meaning of the horns. And that's what we really want to know. He says, and about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up, and before which 3 of them fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, that seemed greater than its companions, as I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came, and the judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. So again, the 10 horns reminds us of the 10 toes in the statue, and because the statue gave us timeline, we know those 10 toes represent the world government that will be in place at the end of the Gentiles. At some point, all these 195 countries will come under 10 rulers. And it's not happening right now, but it will happen. It may happen during the Great Tribulation. Maybe some catastrophic event happens that triggers the Great Tribulation. I don't know. We'll talk about that in the future. But so we bring that knowledge forward to help us understand that these 10 horns represent the worlds of the government at the end of the age. And of course, Daniel wants to know about the beast and the 10 horns, even more so about this interesting 11th horn. That's the one that's the most interesting. So that horn takes out 3 other kingdoms, 3 other kings, and then sets up to rule the others. So we go on in our reading. It says, "Thus he said, as for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it into pieces," 195 pieces as of today. "As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the other former ones, and he shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words of against the Most High." So he's going to blaspheme. He's going to speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half a time. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed in the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. There's your spoiler alert. Now you guys know how it ends, but we're going to get into the guts of it and still learn it. So once again, we're told that the 4th kingdom crushes and breaks into pieces prior kingdoms, just like in Daniel 2. And so this 4th period of this age is a period of fracturing and dividing the world into pieces. And that's the current world we live in, 195 countries. But these pieces will expand to devour the whole earth, uniting 10 kingdoms. And eventually 11th will arise, wipe out 3 of the 10 kingdoms, and this 11th ruler will take over and rule the whole earth for a time, times, and half a time. So this obscure reference to a period of time is one of several places we see a clear connection to Revelation. This term time, times, and half a time appears only in 2 places in the entire Bible. One is right here in Daniel. Guess where the other one is? Revelation 12. So we're going to see it again. So if it weren't for Revelation, we really wouldn't be able to interpret what time, times, and half a time. But when we get into Revelation, I'm going to just give you a little look forward. But when we get into Revelation, we're going to explain it in detail, but we're going to find that the term means 3.5 years. And so right here in Daniel, it says that. So this world ruler will gain complete control over the entire earth for a period of time, 3.5 years. But after the 3.5 years, the leader's authority and dominion will be taken away, and Jesus' second coming will be here. So a new kingdom will be ruled by Jesus, and it will be an everlasting kingdom with no end. So to summarize, we have a confirmation that what we learned in Daniel 2, and that the age of the Gentiles will consist of 4 kingdoms. 4th kingdom is by far the most important because it brings an end to the age and arrival of Christ. And we learned at the end of the age, the world will be ruled by 10 rulers that eventually become one man ruling the entire world with 7 others. And that looks like this funny looking thing. So next week, we're going to go into more about this 11th horn and more about the timing of everything. Keep in mind, we're unpacking this slowly. We're taking our time because, like I said, you can eat an elephant, but you got to do it a little bite at a time and let that settle and then go eat some more. And so that's kind of how we're doing this, because this is such a big thing to learn. So we're doing it a little at a time. Let you guys go home, digest this, ask questions, whatever, and then we'll come back and we'll do it some more. It's going to be a bit confusing at first as we move forward into this prophetic part, the things that happen after these things. It's going to be a little confusing, but just stick with me, just hang with me, and by the time it's over, you guys are going to be fully clear on what's going on, and you'll understand the book of Revelation, and you can explain it to your friends and family. So hang in there. It takes time. As we study more, our understanding is going to come more and more into focus. Next week, we're still going to be in Daniel. This time we're going to be moving into chapter 9. And once we finish with that, then we get to go back to Revelation. So I'm sorry that we've had to spend so much time in the Old Testament, but we're learning a lot about we're going to see when we get into Revelation. So if you want to read ahead, read into Daniel chapter 9. Now I want to give you a little warning. This is going to be me next week. Some of you used to watch the Peanuts cartoons. I'm going to sound like the adults do. Wah, 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 wah. And the reason is next week is very technical and mathematical.